IGN has officially entered the war. They just dropped their Palworld 1.0 review and they gave it an 8 out of 10. Not a pity 8, not a it's fun if you ignore everything wrong with it 8, and not a score written by somebody who played for 90 minutes and declared themselves an expert in PAL labor law. This reviewer spent more than 160 hours with the 1.0 update and completed the campaign that took them over 150 hours. And after all that time, he concluded that this bizarre, janky creature survival fever dream is genuinely great. Somewhere at that exact moment though, a Pokemon fanboy fell to their knees and started crying at a GameStop. For the last 2 years, they have been the loudest online that have insisted that Palworld has no identity, no depth, and no reason to exist beyond scamming people into its Pokemon with guns. Yet one of the biggest gaming outlets in the world just looked at the finished game and said, yeah, it's got problems, but it's also extremely fun. IGN criticized the empty areas, the weak story, technical issues, and a base building system that was designed by someone with a personal hatred for geometry. They did not pretend the PALs possessed the navigational intelligence of a military drone. They saw all the jank, weighted against the full experience, and still landed on an 8. This is what exposes the fanboys, because their problem was never simply that Palworld had flaws. It was that a million people enjoyed it anyway. Now, before someone angrily types after only reading the title, I'm not talking about every person who enjoys Pokemon. I enjoy Pokemon. I have played since the Game Boy era. I've built teams for decades and repeatedly placed my emotional well-being into the hands of a dangerously over-leveled starter before the first gym. There's a major difference between a Pokemon fan and a Pokemon fanboy. A fan can love the franchise while admitting that some of the games are a little weak, some mechanics have gotten stagnant, and that Game Freak occasionally releases something held together by nostalgia with the structural integrity of wet cardboard. Scarlet and Violet. And fans say, I prefer Pokemon. A fanboy appears beneath every Palworld post dressed in imaginary Nintendo armor and announces that the lawyers are coming any day now. They've apparently been coming for 2 years, so I assume they took the same route my pal did when I assigned them to the workbench about 10 feet away. Normal Pokemon fans are fine. You're allowed to like Pokemon and not like Palworld and continue living a perfectly healthy life. I'm speaking directly to the unpaid, fedora-wearing copyright paladins who need this game to fail, because its success raises more questions about their favorite franchise they're not willing to get answers to. The most important part of IGN's review is not the number 8. Those review scores are strange numbers that have the capability of making a grown man feel like the electricity got turned off. Some people see a 7, assume the reviewer personally drove the developers home and punched him in the face. Other people see an 8 and immediately demand to know why the game was robbed of a 10. What matters is how IGN arrived at their score. The review openly criticized base construction because placed objects can't be moved easily, alignment remains annoying, and structural rules are very unclear, to the point that deleting the wrong wall or staircase can cause your whole to collapse, like it's been waiting for an excuse all day. It also called out the weak story, forgettable characters, lifelessness of some settlements, and large areas that occasionally feel like they exist more to increase the map size than actually be relevant. Performance can still be jittery around complicated base builds. Flying into some regions can often cause landscapes to assemble themselves after you've already been standing inside them. These are not microscopic complaints hidden behind blind praise. IGN identified real weaknesses and then asked the most important question that actually matters. Do these problems destroy everything the game does well? Their answer, and mine, is no. That's what fair constructive criticism looks like. You identify what fails, explain how it affects the player, and then you evaluate the completed experience. You don't see one bug, whisper scam into the wind, and then begin constructing a dissertation on why it's terrible. A game can contain serious problems without those problems automatically erasing its strengths. IGN understood that, which immediately makes their review and others like it more useful than someone who just declares the project creatively bankrupt because one anime creature reminded them of another anime creature. I agree with plenty of the IGN criticism, because my base sometimes functions less like an automatic industrial empire and more like a daycare where all the kids have been given access to heavy machinery. One pal's hungry, another becomes depressed, and a third is trapped behind an object that's not physically being blocked by. Is this pal's behavior? Absolutely not. Is the job occasionally still getting done while heads clip through walls? Weirdly enough, yes. That's the distinction people keep refusing to make. A game can be buggy without being a scam. Pathfinding can still need serious work without proving the entire game has no identity. I can criticize a PAL for approaching its assignment with the navigational intelligence of a damn sock, while still finding the overall system entertaining. Some of the jank becomes part of the fun, because these creatures are supposed to be running an industrial operation, and half of them behave like they're drunk. The system should improve, but improvement and enjoyment are not opposing concepts. And that's where a lot of the criticism falls apart for me. The existence of flaws does not automatically tell you how much the flaws matter. A pal walking into a wall while annoying is not game breaking. Entire experience matters. IGN also repeated something that should have ended a huge portion of this argument back in 2024. Palworld has much more in common with survival games like Valheim and Grounded than it does with a traditional Pokemon game. Pokemon at its core is a turn-based role-playing game. Palworld is an open-world survival game. Yes, you capture colorful creatures in both, but during most of the game, you're gathering resources, unlocking technology, crafting equipment, establishing bases, and prepping for an increasingly dangerous area. Combat happens in real time. Your character fights beside the PAL, and stronger enemies require better weapons, armor, and prep. PALs are not simply sitting inside of a sphere until you require them to commit legally sanctioned violence. They plant your crops, water your fields, mine resources, generate electricity, and become part of your base. Creature collecting is not a separate little feature glued onto a survival game. The creatures are woven into the survival system. They integrate into the game's identity. You don't have to took the familiar fantasy of collecting monsters and asked what would happen if those monsters existed inside an open world survival game instead of politely waiting for a 10-year-old to show up inside of a cave. Calling it nothing more than a Pokemon clone because it contains collectible creatures is like calling Subnautica a fishing simulator because there are fish in it. Technically, you identified a fish, but I feel several important details were lost in your investigation. You don't have to enjoy Palworld's combination of systems, but pretending the combination you don't have to exist requires ignoring the actual game. Pokemon with guns got people through the door, but a joke does not keep a game alive for 2 years. A joke does not create a campaign that takes 150 hours to complete. It does not keep players building bases and breeding pals, collecting equipment, and prepping for post-game encounters long enough after the original internet memes stopped being funny. The core loop survived because almost every activity feeds directly into another activity. Better equipment requires better resources pushes you into harder regions create stronger pals, new materials, bosses, eggs, additional technology. This is not a failed gameplay loop. This is the game mugging your attention span in an alley and taking everything it owns. IGN describes the campaign as well-paced, with enough reward and clear objectives that the reviewer rarely felt forced into excessive grinding. Occasionally, a boss destroyed him, and he required better preparation, but preparing for the rematch became part of the fun rather than a punishment. That matches how I play. I would rather fail, work out what happened, and adjust than have a guide explain every decision before I'm allowed to make it. I went into Palworld 1.0 mostly blind. I played some of the early access and learned quickly through questionable choices. That failure gave me a reason to change my team, improve equipment, and return with an actual plan. One part of the IGN review immediately made me respect the reviewer more because he admitted that he rejects the meta and prefers using the pals he personally connects with. Finally, another person of culture. I don't want a spreadsheet telling me which creatures I legally require to love, which weapons I must equip, and which decisions have been proven by the council of people who optimize fun out of everything. I like discovering systems myself, making questionable decisions, and then learning whether those decisions were secretly brilliant or catastrophically stupid. IGN praises the number of ways players can strengthen weaker early pals enough to keep them useful in endgame. You can improve their stats, teach them stronger skills, increase their star ratings, and continue to invest into the creature that you care about instead of replacing your entire party with the same statistically approved team everyone else uses. That matters in a creature game because the whole fantasy is supposed to involve forming attachment. Some games eventually punish you for loving the wrong creature and politely explain that your loyal companion has bad base stats and should be thrown into storage forever. I reject that. My strange little electric hedgehog has been with me since the beginning. I will pump enough resources in him to make Zeus himself nervous. That freedom creates a personal story instead of forcing every player toward the same final team. The pals become workers, combat partners, and creatures that you keep around for no reason, beyond deciding that this one is now your new best friend. This is the kind of connection these games are supposed to create. An 8 does not mean a game is almost flawless. It means that the overall experience is great despite meaningful weaknesses, and that describes Palworld extremely well. The story is kind of forgettable. Most settlements feel like somebody placed 3 NPCs inside of a building and then declared them complete. Sections of the map could use a little bit more dynamic events and more reason to explore. Base construction still remains my mortal enemy because the game gives you an enormous industrial facility, places them inside a limited build area, and watches as you attempt to be some sort of spatial engineer. The rough edges remain obvious, but the systems keep pulling me back towards more discoveries. That's an 8. Not polished enough to be a masterpiece, not broken enough to dismiss it, and dangerously effective at convincing you to complete one final task before you finally go to bed after a 12-hour binge. IGN's verdict works perfectly because the reviewer never confuses flaw with bad. Palworld is janky, bizarre, and occasionally held together with duct tape and blind optimism. It's also extremely bingeable. Those ideas can exist in the same sentence. In fact, that contradiction may be the most accurate description of the entire game. So why does it bother certain fanboys so much? Because Palworld succeeding proves that players are not tired of creature games. They were hungry for a different kind of creature game. For years, critics of Pokemon could be dismissed by claiming older players had simply outgrown the formula, or that creature collecting needed to remain simple for a broader audience. Then Palworld arrived, with survival mechanics, automation, base building, real-time combat, exploration that feels needed, and creatures that are actively participating in the world. Sure, Pokemon tried that with Scarlet and Violet, but then it made the world feel lifeless. You no longer were walking through grass looking for a Pokemon. If they just kept the system we had in Sword and Shield where it was a nice balance of both, it would have worked. Millions of people responded to Palworld with, yes, more of this, please. That creates an uncomfortable question for Pokemon, and it's not, why is Palworld allowed to exist? The real question is, why did someone else recognize the demand first and fill it? Pokemon does not need guns, sweatshops, or Pikachu manufacturing rifle ammunition while Professor Oak's explaining labor laws, but it could offer a deeper exploration, more meaningful difficulty, environmental interaction, and systems designed for people who have understood elemental weaknesses for over 30 years. Legends Arceus felt refreshing because it experimented with catching, exploration, and how Pokemon existed in the environment. Then we got Scarlet and Violet, which took all that and threw it out the window. We were promised an open world game where we could choose our own adventure. Instead, we got a soulless map with no life in it, Pokemon running around, glitching into walls, falling off of cliffs, and areas that didn't scale with what we did. Competition should encourage more experimentation like that. Palworld is not killing Pokemon. It simply pulled up another chair at the table and proved that people are willing to eat something besides the same meal that we've been served for decades. Fanboys don't hate Palworld simply because it's existing. They hate it because it has succeeded loudly enough to make the complacency with Nintendo, Pokemon, and Game Freak harder to ignore. IGN's review does not prove everybody must enjoy Palworld. Some players will hate the survival mechanics, the resource gathering, the grind, if you will. Some will find the world too empty or lose interest long before reaching endgame, and that's completely fine. We have the power to choose. What the review proves is that enjoying Palworld is not some bizarre act of mass delusion caused by guns, sheep, and a temporary internet hype. The reviewer played for more than 160 hours, finished the campaign, documented the major weaknesses, and still concluded that overall the experience deserves strong recommendation. You can dislike Palworld, and that's fine, but pretending it has no identity requires ignoring what players have spent hundreds of hours doing. A game can be janky and compelling. It can borrow ideas while arranging them differently into an experience. It can have a weak story and still have an excellent gameplay loop. It can have creatures that run into walls for no reason, but it's still worth playing. The question has never been whether Palworld had problems. The question was whether the experience it created was worth those problems. IGN clapped back, and their answer was with an 8 out of 10. And my answer is that I'm still playing it. Did IGN get the score right? Play the game, make your own decisions.